Well, you are watching day 4 of After the Hearing, a special streaming show we have here on WFAA+. We have special coverage of this track meet stabbing trial. Karmelo-Anthony is charged with murder in the death of Austin Metcalf. Now, we have seen a lot of stuff. It's been a long day today. We're hearing from young witnesses today. We're seeing body-worn camera today, so we have a lot to talk about. Let's get to our panel really quickly here. Jeremy Rosenthal, longtime attorney, defense attorney currently. How long have you been practicing?
Too long. I think it's 25 years.
And we have Rebecca Lopez, senior crime and justice reporter for WFAA. Let's start with one of the biggest pieces of evidence we saw today, and that's the body-worn camera. Rebecca, can you take us through what we saw? This is from Eduardo Cortez, an SRO.
Yes, so the body-worn camera to me was very powerful, because one of the things that I learned from that body camera footage, because I read the affidavits, I've seen all the documents in this case, and we hear where, and we see the affidavit where Karmelo-Anthony says, he put his hands on me, but I told him not to. But what I didn't realize is that he's actually crying, because when you hear the body-worn camera, you can hear him crying. And he's saying, yes, sir, no, sir, to the officer. And one of the things that both sides pointed out, he doesn't resist, he doesn't do anything, he's very compliant with what the officers were saying. And he's emotional at points throughout that body-worn camera.
Right. And you can definitely see, at one point, you can hear Karmelo-Anthony almost hysterical, crying, and the prosecution and the defense sort of got into this little back and forth exchange through the witnesses, talking about, well, he was sort of flat when he was in the car, and while he was during the ride back, he was kind of flat, and we didn't get to see that. The camera would probably be far too long, and the jury would certainly lose interest. But that's one of the footballs that we saw go back and forth, is how much contrition? Is this something that he sort of turned on and off? And we also heard testimony that really dovetailed with that later on, which was, well, he was walking away at times, maybe running away. It was certainly very wet out there, so I think that it really goes to his emotional state.
Well, and then you hear Cortez say, but when he was in the car, he was calm, cool, collected, but then the defense comes back and they said, but we didn't see all of it. You didn't present, but just a small portion. And if you listen to all of it, you're going to hear him emotional throughout the day.
And so the state is essentially trying to establish that Karmelo-Anthony was not remorseful after this happened. Is that what's going? Is that what?
Well, so one of the big battle lines in this case is over manslaughter, and manslaughter has to do with the intent to kill. And when Karmelo-Anthony, after the fact, says, "Is he all right?" and if Karmelo-Anthony is clearly under some excitement, it makes manslaughter more and more plausible as a defense. So I think a lot of times in this trial, we're all focused on self-defense. That's kind of the big sexy thing that we like to sort of kick around and debate. But manslaughter, I think, is, if I'm the prosecutor, I'm a lot more scared of manslaughter in this case, taking away my straight murder conviction, and that's why they're trying to do everything they can do to project Karmelo-Anthony as sort of non-caring or unemotional. So I think that's why we saw that.
Let's talk about the conversation. It wasn't much of a conversation. So Eduardo Cortez, the officer Cortez, radios the other officers and says, "I have the alleged suspect." And Karmelo-Anthony, right after him, says, this is not alleged, I did it. How does that sort of play into probably the state right now?
Well, if I'm Karmelo-Anthony and I'm his lawyers, I'm going right back to what we were just talking about, and that's the contrition, the excitement, the fact that we're not hiding this. If you see a murder case, for instance, with a shop owner that kills somebody who is trying to stealing, that guy's going to call 911 and they're going to cooperate with the police every time. So if I'm the defense, that's sort of how I'm playing that. That this was a confession, that there was nothing to hide here. And if I'm the prosecutor, I'm trying to do the opposite, right? I'm trying to show that this was flat, that it's a confession, and I sort of leave it at that.
And when they're searching him, he's like, "Can we search?" "Oh yes, so you can search my." I mean, I've seen a lot of police officers search people, and that usually doesn't go down like that. It can be very, very combative at times. But he's like, "Yeah, whatever you need." I mean, it's almost like he's very much complying with what the officer's asking.
But Rebecca, you and I were talking earlier today. The second body-worn camera that we see today is probably one of the most powerful moments we saw in terms of this entire trial. Can you speak to?
Yeah.
This is testimony. First, we are hearing testimony from Jacob Schulz, another SRO.
And he's the officer that actually finds the weapon, and so they show this. But part of what they show, and the way that Bill Wertzke says that we're going to watch some of this video and we're going to see what is happening also with Austin Metcalf. And the family was in there for this, but what we see, and what I was actually surprised when it came up, was they're working on him, and they're doing the chest compressions, and they're like, come on, Austin, and you hear the brother, Hunter Metcalf, just screaming and wailing in the background, and it's gut-wrenching. He's like, that's my best friend, that's my brother, oh my God, help him, and he is just distraught. And I think at one point you see him on the ground, and they're trying to help him because he is so overwhelmed, and that was very emotional. I turned and I looked at the Metcalf family, and they're all crying and wiping away tears, and it was very emotional. And I turned to look at Karmelo-Anthony, and I saw that his lawyer put, I think, his hand on him too. I mean, I think that he was also a little bit overcome with what they were showing.
Jeremy, how do you take an emotion? You know it's going to be an
Right.
emotional moment. How do you take an emotional moment like that?
So this trial is really fought on two levels. There's the emotional plane, and then there's sort of the technical plane. EMTs don't wear body cameras, so we're not going to see that. And the prosecution called Officer Schulz, the SRO. They called him to testify. He ultimately found the knife in a folded up position, and they published the video essentially saying, well, this video is about this, but there's also sort of this scene here with the Metcalfs. But make no mistake about it, this video was there for the emotional impact, which was stunning.
It was, yeah.
Because we were sitting right very, very near to the Metcalfs, and as you would expect, it was very emotional for them to watch it. And so you when you're defending a case like this, you really got to win on both planes. You got to win that emotional fight, but you also have to win the technical, legal fight. And the emotions in a trial where somebody's died it's pretty palpable.
Well, and I think one of the only questions they said, it took you how long to get there or something like that. Well, no, that was the paramedic. No, when they asked the paramedic, thank you for your service. So sometimes they've been a little, gone a little easy on some of the questioning of some of these witnesses. I think the defense.
You brought up the weapon. We have to talk about the weapon.
Right.
That shows up on the body worn camera, and we also see pictures of it, and we know it to be a folding knife, right?
Yeah.
A folding knife. How often do you? I'm sure you're dealing with weapons all the time, right? When you have to present evidence like that, and everyone is watching it, and your jury is watching it,
right?
Where do you take that? I mean,
So the headline, I think, of when we talk about the weapon in this case, was the fact that it was a folding knife that was not completely folded. It was maybe at a 45-degree angle, and it's got a locking mechanism, and they took the jury through what that means. And I think what I took away from that was that Karmelo-Anthony probably didn't have this weapon in position to utilize it during this confrontation, meaning that it was more emotional, meaning he was potentially fumbling for it. He had a cut on his finger.
It wasn't locked, in other words.
It wasn't locked. So I felt like that really supported maybe self-defense, maybe manslaughter a little more than not. And then kind of talking about the handling of it, which we talked about, Job, in a little bit. And this is just sort of more of the theatrics at trial. Bill Wertzke, who is an outstanding trial lawyer, is wearing these gloves that are very surgical and very delicate, and he's picking up these exhibits. Now, why he can't touch it with his bare hands, I don't know. My guess is we've already dusted it by now.
Maybe.
So I don't know why he's doing that, but the jury definitely picks up on small things like that. And then when he presents it to the defense, to see if they're okay with admitting it, the defense when you do that to it, the jury sort of picks up on that type of a thing, and you can't let the jury sort of, if you're defending a case, you can't let the jury, in my mind, sort of get that real technical, real surgical. But that was a nice. I thought that was a nice play by the state.
And one of the things that everybody keeps asking about this is why did he have a knife at a track meet? But when you hear that it was a utility type knife like a Leatherman, well, a lot of people carry those. Now, it is prohibited, and that's one of the things the defense said. It's prohibited at a school, but it is very much legal that you can carry a knife like this, a Leatherman. I mean, a lot of people carry those for different things. And then they had the paramedics say, what do you use that for? He goes, a tool to take off the seatbelt.
Yeah.
And so I think that what the defense is going to try to do here is say it's a tool of some sort that he's using. Why did he have it? Maybe he was using it for something. I think that's going to come up in the defense.
Bill Werski takes the real knife, puts it back in the evidence bag, and then brings out a replica of that exact same knife, and then has him show it to the jury in terms of how it's maybe spring-loaded. I don't know if it is, but it's a folding knife. What's the purpose of bringing a replica of that same knife?
Well, probably again because I do believe that the original knife still has blood, still has some other evidence, and maybe you're trying to preserve that for appeal. But again, I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to show the jury, look how sterile we are with the evidence in this case. Look how meticulous we are. Look how we do all these things. And I think you're exactly right, Rebecca, kind of going back to the point that you were making. I definitely think they're foreshadowing if and when Karmelo-Anthony takes the witness stand, we're going to hear probably something that we haven't heard before about why he had that knife, because that is a question that gets asked repeatedly, that everybody is wondering is, what are we doing with the knife at this track meet?
Right.
And we can put this to bed. There was so much talk about this weapon being a cleat cleaning tool of some kind. It clearly was not that.
No.
It was a utility knife, a utility folding.
Right.
And it's about I think they measured it 3.5 inches long. So yeah, and the defense pointed out this thing is perfectly legal. It's just not permitted within these bounds.
And he asked enough of the younger witnesses that question. Do you know of anybody carrying a knife at the school? And they all answered no.
And I thought that was very interesting, because that was definitely a line of questioning where they kept asking the students, and they said, well, we thought he was bluffing when he had his hand in his backpack and he's about to do something, because we thought he was bluffing. And then a couple of things that they said, but two of them said was, yeah, we wouldn't expect that here in, say, Frisco, which I thought was, I don't know how that went over with the jury. We heard people in the audience that were not pleased with that comment, but with some of those comments. But you wonder about that, because they were saying, look, we didn't think that he was going to do anything. We didn't expect a knife to be in anybody's backpack, because you can't carry it. So they didn't think that he had any kind of weapon.
And I should say there was one witness at the very end, the very last witness did say, I thought there was something in there maybe. Potentially. Right. And he testified that he told Austin, because the testimony everybody says was that Karmelo said something to the effect of, touch me and find out.
Yeah.
And that this witness said, he said out loud, don't touch him. So that was the only one that said something a little bit different.
And the other reasoning was he saw the veins in his hands,
yes,
and he knew that he was holding on to something.
Right. That was an interesting observation.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about the confrontation. It starts as a verbal altercation between Karmelo-Anthony and Austin Metcalf. There's a range between how long that lasted. It's between 4 and 6 minutes, listening to some of the testimony. Then it turns deadly soon after that. Let's talk about the push. We have demonstrations happening on the open, inside the courtroom, right in the middle. Let's talk about those demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the more, I'm not sure that the prosecution expected this, because they did have one of the witnesses said it wasn't just a push, it was, he lifted him up in like a linebacker drill type, like when you see a linebacker, hit the dummies. And so, that's what he said. And so it was, and then the last witness, I was not there for that, but you said that he said, oh no, he felt it.
Right, yeah, so a couple things to sort of think about here. So Karmelo-Anthony was sitting down. Nobody said that he had stood up and really until after the stabbing. So all the witnesses agreed that he was sitting down. All the witnesses agreed that Austin Metcalf was standing up, probably on the row beneath him. Austin Metcalf being a bigger guy, still probably over him. And yes, a surprising moment. And these are teenagers, and they're all going to testify sort of differently. But the first two witnesses characterized the push as kind of on the aggressive side. One said it wasn't very light, but it wasn't very hard. And then they got into the debate over the linebacker drill, right? And of course, Austin Metcalf played linebacker in high school. So the jury definitely got the impression, I think, initially, that this was kind of a more aggressive push, right? So you see the framework for the defense really forming there because, okay, we've got Austin Metcalf, who is 6'1", he's a linebacker, he's a big guy, he is in motion, he is moving, and he's told, don't put your hands on me, and then he makes an aggressive push like that. These are all things I absolutely think we're going to hear and see in the closing arguments, but later witnesses who came down sort of
there were some
minimized.
discrepancies.
Right. Their observations were a little more minimal than that. And it was more of a brush. And a lot of these witnesses, I don't know, and you sort of pointed out, might be respectful towards the Metcalf family. Also, they're in a very structured, authority-laden environment, so they all said that Carmelo-Anthony was the one that provoked the harm, but nobody testified Carmelo-Anthony moved or did anything or stood up or physically provoked anything.
And one said that he was actually joking and laughing right before that. And I thought one of the things that was really effective by the defense is they used the resource officer to say, have you ever been to a confrontation where somebody was seriously injured by just using your hands or your feet and they didn't have a weapon? And he's like, well, yeah, you can cause serious bodily injury with just your hands. And that's going to be, again, what the defense is setting up for a self-defense. Like, he didn't have to have a weapon if he thought that he was going to get pounded or injured severely if somebody's going to beat him up.
Right. The discrepancies we're hearing between the witnesses, how much does that change the trajectory of these things? One says it's a one-handed push. Another one says it's a light push. The other one says it's a lineman move. How much does that change things?
I don't know that it does. I think the more and more the jury hears it, the more and more the sort of the overall story congeals. When you have 6 witnesses who say one thing, and then you have another witness who says something completely different, I think the jury might just sort of discount more observations from that person. But I think they're making clear who was where, who was standing where, who was closer, who had a better vantage point. And so they had one witness who was from a completely different tent. So they're trying to get it from sort of different angles, and there's probably some other strategic reasons for these witnesses too. 4 of the witnesses, 4 of the teenage witnesses were African American, and I think and I can't help but think that maybe there's a strategy behind that also.
Yeah.
And you wanted to add something, Rebecca?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. So it's important for us to talk about the noise.
Right.
Noise, literal noise
Yes.
outside of here. There were some confrontations, and I know you were a witness to some of that, Rebecca, not far from where our campus is.
Yeah, they've
right now.
had, throughout the last couple of days, they've had people shouting and screaming at each other. And I want to really preface this by saying that there are a lot of people that have come in from out of state, that are not from this county, or out of other places, that are not paying attention to anything that's going on in the trial. They're actually spreading rumors on social media of things that never even happened in this case, or is being testified in the courtroom, because they don't care about what's happening in the courtroom. They are here for TikTok clicks, or they are here to instigate and incite some things. And you can tell because they're shouting racial slurs at people, or they're all yelling at each other, and it is kind of on both sides.
They want to make this trial something that it is not.
Right.
Yeah. About race. And I know
Yeah.
every legal expert, and I'm sure you'll say the same thing, anytime you say, does race have something to do with this? And I think your answer is what?
Well, this is why we have trial. We have trial because we have 12 jurors who get to hear all the evidence, and they get a binary choice. This is either guilty or not guilty. So to what extent they put into those ingredients, we don't know. And the DA's office did address race through at least one witness directly sort of confronting it. You knew that they probably would at some point. So to me, that's just a function of our jury system. And to me, look, the jury gets to decide these things, and if race is important to the jury, then it's important to the jury, and if it's not important to the jury, then it's not important. And all the prosecution can do is lay the facts out, and I think they've laid out a lot of facts in this case that are probably not so great for them. But that's what they've done, and the defense, takes those facts and they try to show the jury, look, this is our theory of the case. And the defense has not made this about race through any of their questioning. So I think that's kind of important too to point out. And yes, there's a lot of emotions here. There's a lot of folks here who normally we don't see at the courthouse, and it's America. We're allowed to all do that here. But yeah, I think when it's all said and done, I think the noise out there is probably more than the noise in there.
We should mention the Collin County Sheriff's Department has done an excellent job trying to manage all these instigators who are out here, who don't care about what's happening in there.
And they're letting them get their shouts in and their free speech. They're not being heavy-handed, but they are going to step in and de-escalate and separate the groups if they feel like somebody's going to get harmed. And there's a large law enforcement present on the part of the Collin County Sheriff's Department, and they've done a really good job of keeping everyone in line.
Yeah. Let's talk about, so we don't have cameras inside this courtroom.
Right.
No streaming. So we are at the mercy of Pat Lopez, who is a longtime sketch artist who has been helping us out with this trial. Let's go through some of the photos some of the sketches that she's done. Let's start here. This is Jacob Schulz. This is him testifying. Can you speak to this moment and what you see just over his shoulder?
Well, yeah, that's the knife, and it's again at a 45-degree angle. I thought that this was one of the first really big moments of testimony in this case.
Yeah.
We hear from a lot of witnesses that the prosecution has to call. The EMTs, people who get initial calls, and the dust up really doesn't sort of involve them. But this was when he was testifying about finding the knife. It had been rained on very heavily, and so we could see some blood on the knife in the exhibit, and he was sort of pointing it out to the jury. But it was our first real glimpse and you're looking at a murder weapon. So I think that's a pretty poignant moment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that is a very important moment. I also agree, because I kept trying to envision what this weapon looked like, and because it was described different ways in the black knife, it was described different things in the affidavit, and then you just heard this stuff, and so I was actually surprised when I saw the weapon and the way it was folded and the way it was discovered. That was, I think, a surprising kind of aha moment in the courtroom.
Yeah. We've been very, I think it's been very important for us to be using Pat Lopez's sketches to tell this story. And we've been using the sketches she does on that day to report it on that day, and not using other sketches from the previous day. So this is another sketch we have of Carmelo-Anthony. Can you speak to the strategy when you're having to prepare your defendant and how they dress and appearance? This is all strategy too.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I want to go for 1 second back to the knife.
Yeah,
because I don't know that we've mentioned it here. Yeah. So the knife, everybody agrees that the knife was discarded by Carmelo-Anthony.
Several rows up.
Several rows up, and he threw it, and it kind of, I'm sure it made a clang noise, and so they recovered it there. That was not a point of contention that he discarded that. But yeah, so when you have somebody who's on trial, the jury is paying attention to them very, very heavily through really, really critical moments, and to see their reaction. Carmelo-Anthony's hair is not the same as it was in his mugshot. He's in a well-fitting suit. There's not been a lot of emotion there. And I'm sure that's been something that's been very well drilled into them. So this is something that you have to do when you're defending somebody. You have to know and understand that your client is on stage, and look, it's a long day. You're in that room for 8 hours or so for a day, and so it's very easy for jurors to pick up on very small things, very small mannerisms. Him potentially blocking out when we saw the very graphic images of Austin Metcalf having CPR on him. Yeah. You try to prepare your client as best you can. What you can do is you can probably show him some of that video in your office ahead of time, so that way they sort of get those emotions out. Or if you want a more raw reaction, maybe you make that decision not to show them.
Okay. Let's talk about the next one. This is of Eduardo Cortez, the other SRO officer, and what is being shown on the screen is Carmelo-Anthony being he was handcuffed in this moment, and you're seeing the back of him, and I think Pat Lopez does a really good job of telling a story, and this is actually what did happen.
Yeah.
But the irony is this Carmelo-Anthony is charged with murder, right? And the sweatshirt reads "Essentials: Fear of God."
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a really telling. Yes. That's a really telling message.
That's Virgil's line. It's and it's a very popular line among kids. My son wears that same Essentials Fear God line. It's very popular among kids. But one of the things that you also see in that video is the way that he approaches Carmelo, like when he's Carmelo-Anthony, when he's walking up to him, and you see like exactly what's happening, because we don't know, because you're hearing all these different stories, and it just paints a better picture for the jury of what his demeanor was at the time that he is being put into cuffs, and what everybody around him is doing. I know
this is a very heavy trial. There's a 99.9% of this trial is serious, and it's difficult for all families. There are some, it's hard to say light moments, but there are some moments where, in terms, because we're talking about young witnesses who are showing up to the stand, and we have Bill Werski who's being a little playful by saying, hey, how fast are you? Or you must be really fast if you're on the team. And I think that brought maybe just a little bit of levity in sort of a really, really heavy environment.
Well, and also I'm going back to Cortez. I thought one of the interesting points that the defense made was they were trying to get him to say that Carmelo-Anthony was emotional, and he would not testify to that. He was like, well, he was emotional, and so then Toby Shook asked him, well, you know what it looks like for someone to be crying, right? He's like, well, and he won't concede to that. And he's like, let me make this simple for you. And he kind of like, berates the Cortez a little bit there. And then he finally admits, well, yeah, he was more emotional, because Toby Shook is trying to get him to explain how emotional he was, and he won't concede to that, but then eventually does.
And I was going to say, if I can pick up on a point that you made, and something that I don't think we appreciate in the 21st century, in the year 2026. Thank heavens for body cameras, because we are all tethered to the same facts. There would be a day and age where if Carmelo-Anthony was running from a police officer, we're really going to basically have to take that police officer at their word. And not that we shouldn't, but we shouldn't. This is what we do in America. But if we're watching somebody, and you saw how Officer Cortez kind of pivoted, and he would look at the jury, and he would say, and at one point he was asked a yes/no question, and he just looked at the jury and said, "Ladies and gentlemen," and the defense lawyer cut him off. Those are the types of challenges that defense lawyers fight all the time. Police are difficult to cross-examine. They are trained witnesses, and if it wasn't for the body cameras, we would be tethered to. We wouldn't be tethered to the truth. We would have to sort of live in this world where whatever that police officer says is reality. So at least if we're going to disagree, I think, in a much narrower scope. And to your point that you were making earlier, Mr. Werski, like I said, a very polished trial lawyer, scoring a lot of points through these younger witnesses, making them human. One thing that he's doing with every witness is they're bringing in their parents.
Their parents,
in the very back row, and they're having the parent do that, and the jury is kind of getting a bit of a kick out of it, and so these things are very small victories, but they matter. And direct exam, when you're asking a witness what happened, that's very hard to do. Because it's the witness's testimony, not yours. Werski's doing a great job with it.
We got 2 minutes left, and I want to get to this topic before we end. And I want to talk about manslaughter, because this lesser charge is going to come up, and I think you're saying we're heading in that direction. Tell me about that.
If I'm the prosecutor, I'm a lot more worried about a manslaughter charge than I am self-defense. I'm worried about self-defense because I think on paper it's there, right? But when you have somebody who, I think we can all agree that Carmelo-Anthony didn't wake up that morning wanting to kill somebody, right? He made a mistake by bringing a prohibited weapon onto the campus. That's fine. But if that stab is a few inches to the left, a few inches to the right, or the knife is just displayed, none of us are here right now. And his reaction after the fact shows that he may not have had that intent. So he does come off in that way, sort of as not sympathetic, but a little less culpable, and that's exactly what manslaughter is.
And if they get self-defense in the charge, it is the prosecution has to prove 100% beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense. Do you envision that there could be that one juror that they get that would hang this jury that says, well, it might, it may not, maybe that got a little bit of doubt by the way everything. So you just need that one juror or two jurors that are going to hold out and send this into a mistrial.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a great way to end it. I want to thank you, Jeremy, for being here. I want to thank you, Rebecca. We'll be here every day of the trial. There's a lot more to cover. There'll be content after this episode This is all the content that we've been creating, trying to set the stage for this entire trial. So be sure to watch that after this episode. We want to thank you for watching day 4 of After the Hearing.